Hello and welcome to another episode of the Whisky Snob. My name is Tolga, your host, and today we're completely changing up the format. I'm joined by Chris Chambers. Chris, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me. Chris is Chris heads up the single malt division for African and Eastern, which are one of the two booze distributors in the UAE, basically in Dubai. So he's a very, very important person to people like myself, because obviously we get our whiskey from him, so we've got to be nice to we just say bad things behind his back. It's fine, don't worry about it. He's actually he's a nice guy.
Heard
and he's been quite instrumental in getting us into this path bar school, which is again going to be home to a series of our whiskey reviews for the next couple of months at least, I would say. So stay tuned for those. We've got some really, really exciting things coming up for you. Today we're going to be trying out, the top's missing obviously of the lid of this bottle. We've got something very special for you. We have a Glenrothes, out of focus, 1972, 32-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey. Just little. Glenrothes is actually quite an interesting one, but before we start getting into that, I just want to sort of figure out when you got into whiskey, or how you got into whiskey.
So weirdly enough, despite the fact that I'm from Scotland, it wasn't really in Scotland when I got into whiskey. My dad was more of a beer guy growing up, and so kind of got into that. It was actually, bizarrely enough, in Japan. Scotland had managed to beat France in the football in the qualifiers for Euro 2008, I think that was, which obviously never really happens if you know anything about Scottish football. So myself and my Scottish friend decided that we wanted to celebrate, and so we went to a whiskey bar in Tokyo, where they had more whiskies than I'd ever seen in my life. It was basically like a phone book, if anyone still remembers what phone books are, with about hundreds of different whiskies, which I was very impressed by. And the thing that stuck in my mind was that they had a whiskey from the now defunct Millburn Distillery, and it was closed, distillery that closed just about the same time that I was born. And I went to school in Millburn Academy, and so there was this nice kind of juxtaposition where I had this whiskey that was basically from down the road where I went to school. And it so coincided with the same time I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, and so I thought that...
You found your calling in a whiskey bar?
A whiskey bar in Japan, yeah, absolutely true.
Sounds a little bit like a Scissor Sisters song, isn't it?
It's some kind of ballad, but like I said, that is honestly how it happened, and so I moved back, got my first job in a branch of Oddbins that had a particularly large selection of whiskey, and the rest is boozy history. So,
lovely.
But anyway, it's lunch.
Before we get stuck in, the nose on this thing is fantastic. I know we've had this before, and
yeah.
Chris and I, for our sins, get together. I don't know who's watching this, but if we get together sometimes rather early, let's say if we're going on little road trips and doing sort of little tours, and we end up having, getting stuck in for a drink at 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, and it's usually some really good single malt whiskey. And this is one.
It's absolutely outstanding stuff. I mean, this is everything that a good quality sort of old whiskey should be. I mean, you have a lot of those kind of rich, elegant sort of oaky notes without tasting too much like furniture.
Correct.
You know what I mean? So,
but you find that Glenrothes' sort of character, its signature, is having that rich elegance in its nose. Lots of cream, lots of dried fruits.
I mean, dried fruits, marmalade notes is sort of one of my kind of hallmark notes. I mean, if you had a bottle of the Select Reserve next to this and you were blind tasting them, you would be able to easily tell that they were coming from the same distillery. But it's just kind of a wonderful expression that we have here.
It is phenomenal. Really good. On the nose, like we said, we're picking up that rich cream, a little bit of leather, lots of rich vanilla, as well as a sweet caramel. But there is a big citrus in there as well.
Yeah. So you're kind of like dried fruit, kind of marmalade notes I mentioned. They're definitely much more, but it's just kind of a note just on the back. It's a little more kind of subtle.
Yeah. Cheers, son.
Cheers. Excellent. Dumbstruck.
Sweetness, spice, aromatic spices, especially lots of.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. Glenrothes to me is like a Christmas distillery.
Yeah.
Partly because they do finish their whiskies up in a lot of sherry cask.
Yeah.
And that's their signature. I mean, but this particular is very smooth. At 43%, it definitely tastes a lot stronger than what it is.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to just add a slight drop of water. Would you like to?
Yeah, please. It's showing off just the quality of the cask that they have. I mean, if you're not familiar with the bottling, it's a little bit older. It's in 72, but bottled in 2004. So, getting on a bit now in terms of availability. I can't imagine how much a bottle of this would probably go for these days, but certainly whatever the price they're paying for it now, it's certainly still going to be worth it, I think.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I remember, I think I had actually bought one of these for about $1,000.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think if you were to find one now, you're looking at maybe $1,500 to $2,000, $1,500 to $2,000, which is still quite good value for money.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a 32-year-old whiskey that you're not messing around. It's not like you're going picking up something just off the shelf. There's a lot of time and effort that's gone into this. There's a lot of people. How old are you?
32, so about as old as the bottle.
So there you go. So that whiskey has spent 32 years. So imagine what occurred in your life in those 32 years.
I can very easily imagine that. So yeah.
So if you take that into consideration, how much shit has gone in your life in those 32 years, this liquid has been sat in a cask for that time.
Yeah.
And then some, because it was put into a bottle in 1972, which I'm guessing obviously you're born in 1983. So it gives you an indication of how much love and attention and care has gone into producing this bottle of Scotch, which is why we love what we do and why we enjoy it so much. So on that note, again.
The water?
Yeah. On the nose, it's definitely opened it up. There's lots of orchard fruits now, I guess.
Oh. It's like red apple.
It reminds me a little bit of like walking through the brambles.
Okay. I see where you're going with that. So. Your cooked apples are still sticking to fresh fruit, which I think is kind of remarkable for a whiskey this well aged. So.
And honey.
Yeah.
Not heather honey, but like a floral.
Clover honey?
Could be.
Still very easy to recommend it. Something almost like cognac-like, Calvados-y like with water.
It's definitely opened it up, but the sweetness is good. I think if anything, the heat has come down, the spice has come down, but the sweetness.
Golden syrup as well is pretty strong with this one.
The sweetness really comes through. Adding a touch of water to this has really sort of dissipated the spice, the heat that you got on the first when you're having it straight up. But it has sort of amplified everything else within the whiskey, and it's opened up a little bit, both on the nose and on the palate. The finish, it's not very strong, but it's definitely lingering.
Yeah, yeah.
Like it's moreish. You can just sit there and the flavours just dance around on your tongue.
Yeah.
Like I was just about to go and have another sip, and I was like, no, actually, no, I don't need to, because it's just, it's nice and creamy. It's just literally coated you coat your tongue, and you just sort of sit there and you think, what am I getting now? What am I getting now?
Absolutely. I mean, it's definitely not a whiskey that that you can rush. You know, it's
why would you want to?
Exactly. So if it's last orders, don't order one of these. Just get to the pub earlier, and then get stuck in.
Yeah. I do love literally having having my nose stuck into these things because it never disappoints. Never disappoints whatsoever. Right. I was going to ask you actually, obviously being in the whiskey business or being in the whiskey industry, you must have a few stories from around the ways and on your travels. So do you have any interesting stories about this particular distillery?
Yeah, I mean, it's a story of two distilleries, really. So this is one of the fun things about whiskey is that, again, history in general is interesting, and booze history is, especially during the times when it's a little bit more illegal, there's always sorts of things going on. But the one that amused me was Glenrothes is now held by Glenrothes. Yes. So can't recall who had it beforehand, but what I do know is that there was.
Edrington. It's owned by. It's still owned by. So the distillery is owned by Edrington.
Okay.
But the brand Glenrothes itself belongs to Berry Brothers and Rudd. So Berry Brothers and Rudd are famous for being wine merchants to the royal family. Number 3 St James Street. If you see number 3 gin, that's Berry Brothers. So what they did was they bought the brand Glenrothes, and actually only 5% of the liquid produced at the Glenrothes distillery is used for Glenrothes. The other stuff goes into blends for famous grouse and those things.
Sure, I wasn't sure of the ratio, so like I said, it's always room to learn new things with whiskey. Again, another one of the interesting things. But I think when Edrington were still fully holding the reins, going back into the 70s, if not earlier, the Glenrothes distillery, which of course now owned by Benriach, when it was still in operation, the owners had a wish that they wanted to expand their production of their whole whiskey platform to provide more whiskey for their blends, and they wanted more of a Glenrothes flavour. So normally the sensible thing to do would be to just expand production at Glenrothes. They got plenty of space to do it, and so the money was there to do it. But what they decided was that this wasn't the right thing for Byzantine reasons, and so they decided that they would actually convert Glenrothes distillery into a spirit that would taste like Glenrothes. So they did everything short of panel beating the stills into a different shape. They imported up the water. They tried to get the same sort of peat source, trying to malt the barley to the same specifications. So all sorts of different things, making sure they got the wood from exactly the same supplier. And everything that they did, it still tasted defiantly like Glenrothes, that wonderful kind of boiled sweet complexity that we have with Glenrothes. So this is basically what led to them pretty much ending up closing down Glenrothes in '86. And they then expanded production at Glenrothes. So, and of course, that's a benefit that allows more Glenrothes to be around for us, which of course is absolutely fantastic thing. And like now that Glenrothes was sort of brought back to life, I think it's 2008. I think it was when they started distilling again, and that's wonderful whiskey in its own right, and sort of definitely one to watch as that matures. But the problem is with the whiskey industry is that, like it or not, quite a few decisions are probably made on the influence of maybe one or too many whiskies of their own product. So, so that does result in some odd decisions. But the fact of the matter is that it all just part of the rich history, and the rich history we can think about, as Tolga was saying earlier. 32 years in this whiskey. So
yeah, I mean,
so much that's gone by.
The fact that it holds a lot of its traditions and the way that it makes its whiskey still true to from when, not obviously maybe not from when it first started, but this distillery that's been around since 1879. So you've got a couple of 100 years of decent, 150 years of decent a stretch of making whiskey and perfecting that process, and you can definitely get that within this bottle especially. But again, it's not a dram that will disappoint you. If you can go out and find it, try it for sure. It might be a little bit pricey, obviously, because of its rarity, but you're definitely going to enjoy something that you're not going to forget anytime soon. On that note, Chris, thank you again for joining me.
No problem at all. Cheers.
Thanks to the Path
Barstool. I think you need a second one.
I do. It's empty, but I've got a little sip in there. I'm going to sneak that one in.
Make it last.
Make it last. But yes, thank you for joining us again. Please remember to subscribe to the videos if you haven't already done so. I'm Tolga, your host. This is the Whisky Snobs tasting, and I will see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Cheers.